The emergency session of the Galactic Survival Council began with the display of wreckage that nobody wanted to see again. The Harmonious Endeavor had been a state-of-the-art exploration vessel crewed by 23 beings from 7 different species. And now it was scattered across 300 kilometers of an unmapped moon surface because the crew hadn't known how to survive when their systems failed. The insectoid Rex, who ran the Council's safety division, had compiled the data over 3 centuries of space exploration accidents. And the pattern was clear. Species who mastered space travel often forgot how to survive without it. We require a new standard, Clickzare announced to the assembled representatives, his mandibles clicking with emphasis on each word. All species seeking deep space exploration licenses must now pass the Wilderness Survival Certification. The chamber erupted in chittering, humming, and various forms of protest. The testing ground will be Karakthos 7. Clickzare continued, ignoring the noise. It has been classified as a death world by 16 different xenobiology teams. A death world meant a planet so hostile that evolution there produced species tough enough to eventually reach the stars. Through sheer determination to escape their nightmare, homeworld Karakthos 7 was uninhabited now, but had once spawned a species that immediately left and never looked back. Clickzare displayed the mandatory equipment list on the chamber's main screen, and the number 47 glowed in harsh yellow light at the top. Each item has been calculated to provide maximum survival probability, he explained. Thermal regulators for the temperature variations, water purification systems for the contaminated sources, shelter domes rated for the wind speeds, medical kits for the toxic flora, food synthesizers because nothing there is safely edible, communication arrays because the magnetic fields disrupt standard signals. The list went on and on. The Sesseth delegation, with their forearms and methodical nature, immediately began calculating cargo requirements. The aquatic Nalkori requested amphibious modifications to several items. The crystalline Jal asked about structural load ratings for their shelter domes. 3 months later, the first certification test was scheduled, and the staging area at the orbital station above Karakthos 7 looked like a cargo depot during a supply crisis. The Sesseth arrived with 3 cargo haulers filled with equipment, each item carefully inventoried and tested. Their shelter dome alone weighed 400 kilograms and could theoretically withstand a direct meteorite strike. The Nalkori transported what could only be described as a portable water purification factory, complete with backup filtration membranes and a desalination unit that seemed excessive for a landlocked testing. Zone de Jal candidate arrived with enough construction materials to establish a small colony, their crystalline nature making them paranoid about structural integrity. Other species brought similar loadouts, each interpretation of the 47-item list growing more elaborate as they tried to account for every possible scenario. Then, the human walked in. Commander Maria Santos of Earth's Exploration Corps wore standard-issue clothing and carried single pack that couldn't have weighed more than 15 kilograms on her belt hung a knife in a leather sheath that was at Clickzare. Noticed her first because she wasn't followed by cargo drones or hauler units or any of the logistical chaos that had defined the previous arrivals. He approached her with what he hoped was a welcoming gesture, though his species' body language often confused mammals. Commander Santos, welcome to the certification center, he said. The equipment dispensary is located on the lower level where you can collect your mandatory survival kit. Maria smiled in that way humans did when they were about to be polite about something inconvenient. Thank you, but I have what I need, she said. Clickzare's compound eyes, all 47 individual lenses, focused on her with something approaching disbelief. Commander, perhaps you misunderstand the requirements, he said slowly. The survival kit contains 47 mandatory items, each specifically designed for. I read the list, Maria interrupted gently, and I appreciate the thoroughness, but this should cover it. She patted the knife on her belt. The staging area went quiet in the way that large spaces do when something absurd happens, and everyone wants to witness what comes next. Clickzar pulled up his datapad with trembling manipulator limbs and began reading from the list. Thermal regulator for temperature variations of 60 degrees. He said, "I'll build a fire and find shelter." Maria replied, "Water purification system for the contaminated sources." Clickzar continued, his voice rising slightly. "Boil it," she said simply. "Shelter dome rated for 200 km/h winds." He tried again. "I'll find or make something," Maria said, her patience apparently infinite. Medical kit, food synthesizer, communication array, navigation beacon, emergency rations, atmospheric analyzer. Clickzar was reading faster now. The knife will help me address each of those situations as they come up. Maria Sajjan assessed the delegate step forward, all four arms crossed in a gesture of obvious disapproval. "This is either suicide or mockery," the Sasith declared. "Our species spent 2 years preparing for this certification, and this human appears to treat it as a joke. I assure you I'm taking it seriously," Maria said, turning to face the Sasith. "I've spent the last 6 months studying Paractos 7's environment, climate patterns, geological features, and ecosystem, and I'm confident in my approach." Confident with a knife against a death world? The Sasith's voice carried the sharp edge of sarcasm. "Confident with training, knowledge, and adaptability," Maria corrected. "The knife is just a tool that helps me apply those things." Clickzar's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed this, which was his species' equivalent of deep thought or possibly an oncoming stress. Multigalactic law was frustratingly clear on this point. Candidates could bring whatever equipment they wished to the certification test as long as they survived the 72-hour evaluation period. There was no minimum equipment requirement, only the recommended list that every other species had treated as mandatory. "I must formally note my objection to this approach," Clickzar said, already composing the incident report in his mind. "But you are within your rights to proceed, and I cannot stop you." "Thank you," Maria said. "I appreciate your concern." The other candidates watched as the human completed her registration with nothing but a knife and a pack that probably contained some basic supplies. The Y'all delegation clustered together, their crystalline bodies refracting light as they communicated through subsonic vibrations. The Nalkori candidate checked and rechecked their water purification factory. The Sasith ran diagnostics on their shelter dome's structural integrity. For the 4th time, everyone was suddenly very aware of how much they were relying on their equipment and how little this human seemed to need. Clickzar returned to his monitoring station and pulled up the casualty prediction algorithms. He entered Maria Santos's equipment loadout into the system. 1 knife, 1 human. The algorithm couldn't compute a survival probability because the dataset was too far outside normal parameters. It simply returned an error message that translated roughly to insufficient equipment for calculation. Clickzar overrode the error and forced a prediction based on similar low equipment scenarios from the historical database. The survival probability came back at 12%. He saved the report and added a note that he would likely be filing paperwork for a recovery operation within 48 hours. The human seemed nice enough, and he regretted that her overconfidence would probably get her killed. But the death world didn't care about confidence or politeness or the strange human belief that a single knife could replace 47 pieces of specialized survival equipment. Caracto 7 would teach her that lesson. Clickzar just hoped the lesson wouldn't be fatal. The deployment was scheduled for dawn station time, which meant in 6 hours he would be watching to see if the human's confidence was justified or if it was just another word for recklessness. He suspected he already knew the answer. The dropships descended through Caracto 7's atmosphere like seeds scattered across hostile soil. each one carrying a candidate to a different zone of the death. World's most unforgiving continent Clixair watched from the orbital monitoring station as the ships released their passengers and retreated to safe altitude, leaving the candidates alone with whatever they had brought to keep them alive. The monitoring room was crowded with observers from various species, all curious to see how their representatives would perform. And all of them had noticed a human with her single knife. "Sesth candidate has landed in Zone 7, reported Trilvex, Clixair's assistant, deploying shelter dome now on the screen. The four-armed Sesth moved with mechanical precision, unpacking components and assembling them according to some pre-programmed sequence within 8 minutes. A perfect dome stood on the rocky ground, its surface already adjusting to the thermal load as Karakthos 7's sun climbed higher. Nalkori candidate has reached Zone 12 and is establishing water filtration." Trilvex continued. Systems showing full operational status. The aquatic being had chosen a location near one of the planet's rivers, which looked inviting until you remembered that the water contained 17 different compounds that would shut down most species' kidneys within hours. The filtration factory hummed to life, and clean water began trickling into storage containers. Jal candidate is constructing primary shelter in Zone 4, Trilvex said. Estimated completion time 43 minutes. The crystalline being was building what looked less like a shelter and more like a fortification, with walls thick enough to stop projectiles and a roof designed to shed the acid rain that occasionally fell in that region. Every candidate was following the pattern. Land. Establish shelter. Secure resources. Survive then. Trilvex switched the main display to Maria Santos in Zone 9. Human candidate has landed and is, he paused, his mandibles spreading in confusion, walking around looking at things. Maria had indeed begun walking a wide circle around her landing site. Studying the terrain with careful attention, she knelt beside plants and examined their leaves without touching them, looked at the soil composition, checked the tree line, and studied the angle of the sun. She is performing reconnaissance, Clixair said, gathering information before acting. But every moment without shelter established is a moment of vulnerability. Trilvex objected. Perhaps humans calculate risk differently. Clixair replied after 20 minutes of observation. Maria finally stopped at a spot where 3 large trees formed a natural triangle. She unslung her pack and pulled out the knife. What happened next made every observer in the monitoring room lean closer to their screens. Maria began cutting branches from nearby trees, selecting each one with obvious purpose, testing flexibility and strength before deciding whether to keep or discard it. She laid the branches across the space between the 3 trees, creating a framework that used the living trees as primary supports. Then she gathered broad leaves from a plant species the Botanical Survey had identified as having waterproof properties, and began weaving them together. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency over and under, creating a lattice that grew into sheets. These sheets went over the branch framework, overlapping like scales or roof tiles, each one positioned to shed water away from the center. She is building shelter from local materials, Trilvex said quietly, without any tools except the knife for cutting. No, Clixair corrected, watching closely. She is seeing tools everywhere and using the knife to claim them. Within 2 hours, Maria had constructed a shelter that looked primitive compared to the high-tech domes and fortifications of the other candidates. But it was functional, and it was done. She stood back, examined it from multiple angles, then made small adjustments to improve the waterproofing on one corner. Next, she gathered stones from a nearby stream bed and arranged them in a circle. She cleared the ground inside the circle down to bare earth, then gathered dry grass and strips of bark from a dead tree from her pack. She produced a piece of metal that looked like it might have been part of some other tool. and she used the spine of her knife to strike it against a piece of the local flint-like rock. Sparks flew on the third strike. Landing in the nest of dry grass she prepared, she bent close and blew gently, nurturing the spark into smoke and then into flame. She made fire, Trilvex said, and his voice carried something that might have been awe. Without a thermal ignition unit or plasma starter, she made fire. Humans are from a death world too, Clickzare reminded him. Perhaps they remember older methods, with fire established? Maria began the next task. Water. She returned to the stream and studied it carefully, then began gathering specific plants that the botanical database had noted as having fibrous stems using her knife. She stripped these stems and began twisting them together. Creating cord, with the cord, she wove a basket shape. Working slowly to make it as tight as possible, the first basket leaked when she tested it with water. So she went back to work, weaving tighter, and adding a layer of clay from the stream bank that she worked into the gaps. The second basket held water. She filled it and brought it back to her fire, where she had arranged stones to create a support system. The basket sat above the flames, but not in them, and the water began to heat. She is boiling water for purification, Clickzare said. The basket will burn eventually, but she only needs it to last long enough to kill the pathogens. The Nelkari brought a 400-kilogram filtration system, Trilvex pointed out. The human made one from plants and mud. Both achieved the same result, Clickzare said. But he was reassessing his initial predictions about the human survival chances by nightfall. Maria Santos had established a camp that met all basic survival requirements: shelter, fire, water, and a stockpile of materials for maintenance and repairs. She had even set simple alarms around her perimeter using sticks and dried leaves, arranged so that anything large enough to be dangerous would make noise moving through them. The other candidates had established more impressive-looking camps with their technological advantages. But Maria's camp had something theirs lacked. It was made entirely from the environment around her, which meant she understood that environment in a way the others didn't. Clickzare switched between camera feeds, watching the Sessive candidate adjust climate controls inside their dome, watching the Nelkari candidate process another batch of water through their factory, watching the Jal candidate add another layer to their fortress walls. Then he switched back to Maria. She sat by her fire, using her knife to sharpen a straight branch into a point, creating what was obviously a spear. Why does she need a weapon? Trilvex asked. The dangerous fauna in her zone are diurnal and have already retreated for the night. Maybe she plans to hunt, Clickzare suggested. Or maybe she just likes to be prepared. Maria tested the spear's balance, made another adjustment to the point, then set it within easy reach and began preparing something that looked like food from her pack. She ate slowly, staring into the fire, and Clickzare wondered what she was thinking. Was she confident? Scared? Regretting her minimal equipment choice? Her face revealed nothing except calm focus. All candidates have survived day one, Trilvex announced, updating his logs. No distress beacons activated. All vital signs within normal ranges. Day one is always the easiest, Clickzare said. The real test begins tomorrow when the storm system moves in. The hyperstorm was already visible on the satellite weather tracking. A massive system that would hit the testing zones in approximately 28 hours. Every candidate had been briefed about it, and the equipment lists had been designed specifically with storms like this in mind. The shelter domes could handle the wind. The power systems could maintain climate control. The structural fortifications could endure the pressure. But a shelter made of branches and leaves? Clickzare didn't see how it could survive, and he began preparing the emergency extraction protocols because he suspected Maria Santos would need them soon. The human finished her meal and added more wood to her fire, building it up to last through the night. Then she crawled into her shelter and disappeared from the external camera view. The infrared cameras showed her heat signature settling into what appeared to be sleep. Clickzare envied her apparent peace of mind. He would be up all night, monitoring the candidates and worrying about whether his incident report would need to include a fatality. The death world settled into its uneasy night, full of sounds that reminded every species why they had worked so hard to leave such places behind. Somewhere in that darkness, a human slept with nothing but a knife, and her confidence. Clickzare hoped that would be enough. But hope, he knew, was not a survival strategy. The storm came early, and, angry like Karakthos 7, had taken personal offense to the intrusion of off-worlders into its territory. Clickzare had seen the weather patterns shift during his morning review of satellite data, and the hyperstorm that was supposed to arrive in 28 hours was now projected to hit in 6. All candidates need immediate notification, he ordered, triggering the emergency broadcast system. Storm acceleration detected. Seek shelter and secure all equipment throughout the testing zones. Alarms chimed on communication devices and heads-up displays. The Sessith candidate immediately began running diagnostics on their shelter dome. Checking every seal and power connection, the Nelkori retracted their filtration systems' external components and activated their structure's storm mode, which involved additional support struts deploying from the base. The Jal reinforced their fortress walls with additional bracing, their crystalline hands working with the frantic energy of someone who understood what was coming. Maria Santos heard the alarm and emerged from her shelter where she had been improving the waterproofing with additional layers of leaves. She looked at the sky where dark clouds were building on the horizon like a bruise spreading across the planet's face. Clickzare watched her through the camera feeds and saw her expression shift from calm to calculating. She didn't panic or activate her distress beacon or demand immediate extraction. Instead, she grabbed her knife and began moving through her camp with purposeful speed. She scattered her fire, burying the coals under dirt to prevent them from spreading. She grabbed her pack and the spear she had made, then stood looking at her shelter for a long moment before turning away from it. She is abandoning her camp, Trulvex observed. Why would she abandon the shelter she worked so hard to build? Because she knows it will not survive what is coming, Clickzare said, watching Maria move with the focused intensity of someone executing a plan. Maria was running now, not away from the storm but towards something specific. Clickzare pulled up the geological survey data for Zone 9 and traced her path across the terrain map. She is heading for the cliff face on the eastern boundary, he said. The survey noted cave formations there. Natural shelter, Trulvex said. Understanding immediately, storm hit the outer zones first, and the monitoring station's sensors began registering wind speeds that climbed past 100 kilometers per hour and kept climbing in Zone 7. The Sessith candidate's shelter dome began to vibrate under the assault, its structural integrity systems working at maximum capacity to distribute the load. The dome's status display showed yellow warnings spreading across its surface like a disease in Zone 12. The Nelkori candidate watched. Their power cells drained faster than the calculations had predicted as the climate control systems fought to maintain stable temperature against the plummeting cold. The storm was stronger than the models had suggested, pulling heat from the air like a thief in Zone 4. The Zhao candidate discovered that their fortress walls had a fatal flaw. They had been designed for vertical load-bearing, but not for the horizontal shear forces of 200 km/h crosswinds. A crack appeared in the western wall, and the Zhao could hear it spreading in Zone 9. Maria Santos reached the cliff face just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. The drops hit like projectiles, each one carrying enough force to bruise She found the cave entrance the geological survey had documented. A narrow opening that widened into a larger chamber beyond. She squeezed through and disappeared from the external camera view. "We have lost visual on the human candidate," Trilvex reported. "Cave system is blocking the signal. Can we get telemetry from her beacon?" Clickzare asked. "Basic vital signs only," Trilvex said. "Heart rate elevated but stable. Body temperature normal. No distress signal." "Then we wait," Clickzare said. The waiting was the last thing he wanted to do. The storm reached its full fury, and Karakthos 7 showed why it had earned its Death World classification wide. Speeds peaked at 230 kilometers per hour. Far beyond the upper range the equipment had been rated fourth. Temperature dropped 40 degrees in 20 minutes. Rain fell in sheets so thick that visibility dropped to near zero in Zone 7. The Seseth shelter dome finally failed, a catastrophic structural collapse that happened in seconds. The candidate managed to activate their distress beacon just before the dome's climate control failed, and the emergency extraction drone fought through the storm to pull them out. The Seseth survived but lost one of their forearms to severe frostbite during the exposure in Zone 12. The Nalkori candidate watched their power cells hit critical levels and made the difficult choice to activate their beacon before the systems failed completely. They were extracted within 30 minutes. Hypothermic but alive in Zone 4, the Jal candidate tried to reinforce their fortress walls from the inside, but the cracks spread faster than they could compensate when the western wall collapsed. It triggered a cascade failure that brought down the entire structure. The Jal activated their beacon from beneath the rubble, and the extraction team had to use cutting equipment to free them. 3 candidates extracted, multiple injuries, and the storm was still growing stronger. Clickzare stared at the blank screen where Maria's video feed should have been, watching the basic telemetry data that told him almost nothing. "Her heart rate is steady," Trilvex reported. "Lower than it was during her run to the caves. Actually, she has found shelter and is resting," Clickzare said. "Or she is unconscious and the sensors are malfunctioning. Should we send an extraction drone?" Trilvex asked. "Not yet," Clickzare decided. "She has not activated her beacon, which means she does not believe she needs rescue, or she cannot reach her beacon," Trilvex suggested darkly. The storm raged for 6 hours, longer than any previous hyperstorm on record for this region. It tore apart the landscape, uprooted trees, scattered equipment, and reminded everyone watching that nature on a death world was not something to be managed with technology alone. It was something to be respected and feared. When the storm finally passed, it left behind a transformed landscape. The testing zones looked like they had been scoured by some angry god. The Seseth dome was a twisted wreck of metal and composite materials. The Nalkori filtration factory had been scattered across 300 meters of terrain. The Jal fortress was a pile of rubble that would take days to excavate. And in Zone 9, Maria Santos, the simple shelter of branches and leaves, had been completely obliterated. Nothing remaining but the stone circle where her fire had been. "Human candidate's beacon is reactivating," Trilvex said suddenly, his mandibles spreading in surprise. "Signal strength is strong. Vital signs all normal." The video feed flickered to life, showing the cave entrance from the inside. Maria emerged into the weak sunlight of post-storm afternoon. Dirty and wet, but moving with steady purpose, she surveyed the destruction of her camp without visible emotion, then began walking the perimeter. "Deploy observation drones to her location," Clickzare ordered. "I want to see what she does next." The drones arrived to find Maria collecting pieces of her scattered equipment, salvaging what could be salvaged and discarding what could not. She rebuilt her fire using the same method as before, the knife striking flint to create sparks. She constructed a new shelter, this one smaller and lower to the ground. Learning from the storm's lesson about wind resistance, she even recovered her water boiling basket. which had somehow survived by being wedged between two rocks within 3 hours of emerging from the caves. Maria Santos had re-established her camp. It was not as elaborate as before, but it was functional, and it was her slick Zare pulled up the cave survey data and cross-referenced it with the storm. Tracking Maria had remembered information from the geological briefing, identified natural shelter, and reached it before the storm hit inside the caves. She would have been protected from the wind and rain. The thermal mass of the rock would have kept the temperature more stable than any climate. Control system, she had even found water sources inside. According to the geological data, the knife did not protect her from the storm, Trulvex said slowly, working through the implications. But it allowed her to reach protection that was already there. She did not try to fight the death world, Clickzare said. Understanding finally settling over him like the calm after the storm. She worked with it, used what it provided, adapted to what it demanded. The other candidates brought solutions. Trulvex continued the thought. She brought the ability to find solutions on the screen. Maria Santos sat by her rebuilt fire and used her knife to strip bark from a branch. Creating the material from more cord, she worked with patient efficiency, not hurried or panicked. Just steadily building what she needed from what was available. Clickzare updated his incident report, removing the section about expected fatalities and adding a new section about unexpected success. The human had survived a hyperstorm with nothing but a knife, and her ability to adapt. 3 other candidates with millions of credits worth of equipment had needed rescue. The implications were profound and uncomfortable. Perhaps the 47-item list was not the solution to survival on death worlds. Perhaps the solution was something that could not be put in a list at all. The third day began with what should have been a simple extraction operation for the remaining candidates. But the death world had one more lesson to teach. The Jal candidate in Zone 4 had been cleared by medical teams after their fortress collapse and had chosen to complete the certification rather than accept a medical withdrawal. Their pride demanded it, and their species did not accept failure easily. But the rock slide triggered by the storm had created unstable terrain between their location and the designated extraction point, and when the Jal attempted to cross it, the ground shifted beneath their crystalline feet. The distress beacon activated automatically when the sensors detected the candidate was trapped, and the monitoring station erupted into organized chaos. Jal candidate is pinned under debris in Zone 4, Trulvex announced, reading the telemetry data with growing concern. Life signs stable, but they cannot move. Structural damage to their lower limbs detected. Deploy rescue drones immediately, Clickzare ordered. The terrain is too unstable for automated navigation, the drone operator reported. We risk triggering a secondary collapse if we attempt drone extraction. Then deploy the specialized rescue team, Clickzare said. Estimated arrival time is 6 hours, the operator replied. They need to launch from the surface base and navigate around the storm-damaged areas. 6 hours was a long time to be trapped on a death world. Even with medical support standing by, the other candidates received notification of the situation through their communication systems. A standard protocol to keep everyone informed of emergency situations. Maria Santos heard the broadcast while she was preparing a fish-like creature she had caught in the stream for her morning meal. She stopped, set down her knife, and picked up her communicator. "This is Santos," she said. "I can hear the beacon from here. I think I'm only a few kilometers away from Zone 4. Clickzare's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed this. "Commander Santos, you are not required to respond to this situation," he said carefully. "Your certification test is essentially complete, and any assistance you provide would be voluntary." "Understood," Maria said. "I'm going anyway. Somebody needs help." She was already moving, gathering her knife and pack, checking her bootlaces and making the small adjustments that humans did before physical exertion. "Commander, the terrain between your location and Zone 4 is extremely hazardous," Click-Zar warned. "The storm has destabilized multiple areas, and you would be putting yourself at significant risk." "Noted," Maria said. "Uploading my planned route now. Feel free to advise if you see problems." She transmitted a map showing her intended path, and Click-Zar studied it with growing respect. She had chosen a route that avoided the most obvious dangers. Using terrain features to minimize exposure to unstable areas, it was not the fastest route, but it was the smartest one. "Route appears sound," Click-Zar admitted. "But Commander, you should know that the estimated rescue team arrival is 6 hours. You would likely reach the JAL candidate well before professional help arrives." "That's the idea," Maria said, and she began running. The monitoring station's observers watched as the human moved across the dangerous landscape with careful speed. She tested suspicious ground before committing her weight, chose her path several steps ahead, and adjusted her route when she encountered unexpected obstacles. When she reached a river swollen by storm runoff, she didn't hesitate or look for a bridge that didn't exist. Instead, she studied the banks until she found what she was looking for: thick vines hanging from the trees. She cut several vines with her knife, tested their strength by hanging her full weight from them, then selected the 3 strongest. She braided these together, creating a rope thicker and more reliable than any single vine. She tied one end to a solid tree on her side of the river, then threw a weighted rock attached to the other end across to the far bank. It took 3 attempts before she could loop the rope around a tree on the far side and pull it tight. Then she used the rope to swing across the rushing water, her pack held above her head to keep it dry. She built a rope crossing in under 10 minutes. Trilvex said quietly. Most species would have called for aerial extraction. She assumed she can solve her own problems. Click-Zar replied, "Because apparently she usually can." Maria continued through terrain that should have stopped someone on foot, but she treated each obstacle as a puzzle rather than a barrier, a sheer cliff face. She used her knife to carve handholds in the softer rock, climbing with patient determination a field of toxic plants identified by their distinctive coloring. She cut a long stick and used it to push the plants aside, creating a safe path without direct contact. A creature that looked aggressive and territorial? She observed its behavior, identified its warning displays, then backed away slowly while maintaining eye contact until she was clear of its range. Every challenge met with a solution drawn from observation and applied with the knife as a tool to make the solution real. She reached Zone 4 in just under 2 hours, which was impossible by conventional thinking, but clearly possible by human standards. The JAL candidate was trapped under a pile of rocks that had shifted when the ground beneath them gave way. Their crystalline structure was cracked in several places, and the leaking of their internal fluids had created a small puddle of what looked like liquid glass. "Commander Santos has reached the JAL candidate," Trilvex reported. Establishing visual contact now, Maria approached carefully, testing each step to avoid triggering another collapse. "Hello there," she called out. "I'm Commander Santos, human, here to help. Can you tell me what hurts?" The JAL made a sound like wind chimes in a breeze, their species' expression of pain. "My lower structure is compromised," they said in translated standard. "I cannot move without risking further damage." "Understood," Maria said, circling the rock pile to assess the situation. "I'm going to get you out, but I need you to stay very still while I work." She found a long branch that the storm had torn from a tree and trimmed it with her knife until it was straight and strong. Then she gathered several large rocks and arranged them into a specific pattern. Click-Zar watched with fascination as Maria constructed what he recognized from ancient engineering. Text as a lever and fulcrum system, she positioned the branch under the largest rock, pinning the JAL set her fulcrum stone at the calculated point, and began applying pressure. The rock shifted slightly. Maria adjusted her position and pushed harder. Using her full body weight and leg strength, the rock shifted more, rising just enough to create a gap. "Can you pull yourself free?" Maria asked, straining to hold the lever in place. "Not without assistance," Dajjal replied. "My limbs are not responding properly." Maria looked around, grabbed a smaller rock with her free hand, and wedged it into the gap she had created. This held the large rock in place. When she released the lever, she repeated the process with 2 more large rocks, each time gaining a few more centimeters of clearance. Then she grabbed Dajjal directly and pulled, her muscles straining against the weight of the crystalline being. Dajjal came free in a shower of smaller rocks and leaked more of their internal fluid. But they were no longer trapped. Maria immediately began first aid, using plant sap she had gathered earlier and identified as having coagulant properties. She spread it across the cracks in the jaw structure, and the sap hardened on contact, creating temporary seals. "This won't heal you," Maria said, working quickly, "but it should keep you stable until proper medical help arrives." "You came," Dajjal said, their voice carrying harmonics of confusion. "You had no obligation. Your test was complete. Yet you came. Someone needed help," Maria said simply. "That's reason enough." She cut branches and used cord she had made from plant fibers to construct a travois, a primitive transport device consisting of 2 poles with a platform stretched. Between them, she loaded the Dajjal onto this contraption with surprising gentleness for someone who had just been moving rocks. Then, she began pulling the travois toward more stable ground, her boots digging into the soil with each step. "The extraction point is 2 kilometers away," she said, breathing hard but steady. "I can get you there in less than an hour if you can handle the bumpy ride." "I will endure," Dajjal replied. Monitoring station watched as Maria Santos dragged the being twice her mass across difficult terrain, stopping occasionally to adjust her grip or clear obstacles from the path. She reached the extraction point 43 minutes later. Well before the rescue team arrived, she set the travois down carefully and collapsed beside it, breathing heavily but smiling. "We made it," she said to Dajjal. "Told you I'd get you there. You brought a knife," Dajjal said, their harmonics carrying something that might have been wonder. "And with it you built tools, solved problems, crossed impassable terrain, and saved my life." "The knife helped," Maria admitted, "but mostly I just paid attention to what was available and figured out how to use it." ClickZare saved the complete recording of the rescue operation and flagged it for mandatory viewing by all future certification candidates. The human had just demonstrated something that 3 centuries of safety protocols had failed to capture. Survival was not about having the right equipment, it was about having the right mindset and the willingness to help others even when you had already proven everything you needed to prove. The rescue team arrived to find Maria Santos teaching the Dajjal candidate how to start a fire with friction because the Dajjal had expressed curiosity about the technique. They were laughing together, a human and a crystalline being, sharing knowledge on a death world that had tried its best to kill them both. It was the most unexpected thing ClickZare had seen in 30 years of running certification tests, and somehow it was the most obvious thing in the world. The certification ceremony took place in the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council building, where representatives from 200 species had gathered to witness something that nobody quite understood yet, but everyone sensed was important. Commander Maria Santos stood on the presentation platform wearing a clean uniform that contrasted sharply with the memories everyone had of her covered in mud and dragging a wounded Dajjal across hostile terrain. The crystalline being she had saved insisted on presenting her certification personally despite still recovering from their injuries. Their cracked structure had been repaired with medical polymer that refracted light in beautiful patterns, turning damage into decoration. the Galactic Survival Council recognizes Commander Maria Santos as fully certified for deep space exploration. Dajjal announced, their voice harmonizing through the chamber's acoustics. She has demonstrated exceptional survival skills, adaptability under pressure, and the courage to help others when she could have prioritized her own safety. The chamber erupted in various forms of applause. Clicking, humming, tapping, and the human tradition of striking their appendages together, but Clickzare could see the confusion still present in many faces. Rex Counselor, who oversaw all certification standards, approached the platform with obvious hesitation in their movement. Commander Santos, the counselor began, their translator rendering the clicking sounds into standard language. We must confess that we do not fully understand what we have witnessed. The chamber quieted, everyone leaning forward to hear this. Conversation. Our 47-item survival kit was developed through rigorous analysis of 3 centuries of data. The counselor continued. Each item addresses a specific survival need identified through actual incidents and casualties. I read the documentation. Maria said respectfully, it's thorough work. Yet you brought only a knife. The counselors. Mandibles spread in the Rex expression of deep confusion. And you survived conditions that defeated candidates with full equipment loadouts. How is this possible? Maria unsheathed her knife and held it up so the light caught the blade's edge. Your 47 items are solutions, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. This knife is a problem solver. Do you see the difference? The counselor's compound eyes focused on the blade, but Clickzare could tell they were still processing the concept. Maria continued, warming to her explanation. Your kit says, here is what you need for water purification and provides a specific device that does that one job perfectly. She said, my knife says, you need water purification. So figure out how to achieve that goal with whatever resources are available. She turned to address the broader audience, speaking to all of them now. Your species each mastered technology by identifying problems and creating solutions. Then you built those solutions into tools and devices and systems, Maria said. Humans did the same thing. We have cities and ships and all the same technology you do. But somewhere along the way, we kept one foot in the problem-solving mindset. She continued, we packed the knife not because it's the best tool for any one specific job, but because it's good enough for every job if you're willing to think. The Sesseth delegate, who had objected to her minimal equipment, approached the platform, all 4 arms gesturing with emphasis. Are you saying our approach is wrong? They asked, their tone defensive. That spending 2 years preparing for the certification was wasted effort? Not at all, Maria said quickly. Your equipment is excellent. And if I were leading a long-term expedition where weight and space weren't concerns, I'd bring comprehensive gear too. But the test asked a specific question. She continued, can you survive with limited resources? And to answer that question, I needed to demonstrate resourcefulness rather than resources. Dajjal stepped forward, their repaired structure catching the light. She speaks truth that my people had forgotten. They said, we brought a fortress because we feared the wilderness. She brought a knife because she understood the wilderness was not an enemy to be defended against, but a resource to be engaged with. Clickzare found himself clicking his mandibles in agreement, a reflexive response he couldn't suppress. When the storm destroyed my fortress, Dajjal continued, I was helpless because my solution was gone. When the storm destroyed her shelter, she built another because her problem-solving ability was still present. The chamber erupted in discussion as species clustered together. To debate this new perspective, the Nelkuri delegation argued that technological solutions were more reliable than improvisation. The Crystalline Jal contingent countered that reliability meant nothing when solutions failed. The Sesseth pointed out that not every species had the same adaptability as humans, and that comment sparked the next phase of understanding Small mammalian delegate from a species Clickzare didn't recognize stood and spoke. Perhaps this is not about copying human methods, they said thoughtfully, but about understanding the principle behind those methods. Explain. The Rex counselor requested. Humans are from a death world. The mammalian delegate continued. They evolved in an environment that forced them to adapt or die. So adaptation became their survival strategy. But many of us are not from death worlds. They continued. We are from gentler places where specialization was more effective than generalization, where having the perfect tool for one job was better than having an adequate tool for many jobs. So we cannot simply become human in our approach, they concluded. But we can learn from their approach and integrate it into our own methodologies. Maria nodded enthusiastically at this. That's exactly right, she said. I'm not suggesting everyone should abandon technology and run into the Vology and run into the fend wilderness with just a knife. I'm suggesting that technology should enable problem solving rather than replace it. She said, bring your shelter dome, but also know how to build a shelter without it. Bring your water purifier, but also understand the principles of water purification so you can improvise if it fails. The Rex counselor's mandibles clicked rapidly as they processed this. And Clickzare recognized the pattern as indicating a major paradigm shift in their thinking. You are proposing that we modify our certification standards, the counselor said slowly. I'm proposing that you change what you're testing for, Maria replied. Don't just test whether candidates have the right equipment. Test whether they have the right mindset. And what mindset is that? The counselor asked. The belief that every problem has a solution, Maria said simply, and the willingness to find that solution using whatever resources are available. The chamber went silent as everyone considered the implications. Finally, the Rex counselor spoke. The Galactic Survival Council will convene to discuss revision of certification standards. They announced formally. The 47-item equipment list will remain as a recommended loadout, but candidates will be permitted to pass certification with any equipment they can justify. Furthermore, the counselor continued, the evaluation criteria will be expanded to include adaptability, resourcefulness, and problem-solving ability in addition to basic survival skills. We cannot change our nature, they concluded, but we can learn to value the qualities that enabled some species to survive conditions that defeated others. The chamber erupted in discussion again. But this time, the tone was different. Species were not defending their positions, but exploring new possibilities. The human concept was spreading like a beneficial infection through the galactic community. Some species remained skeptical and insisted that technological solutions were superior to improvisation. Others began researching what they termed adaptive minimalism and requesting human consultants to teach courses. Human survival instructors found themselves suddenly in high demand across multiple sectors. Training programs began incorporating improvisation exercises. Alongside technical instruction, equipment manufacturers started designing tools that could serve multiple functions rather than single specialized purposes. And on Karakthos 7, the monitoring station established a small museum in what had been a storage area. Among the exhibits of failed Sessith climate dome fragments and collapsed Jal fortress components. They placed a simple display case. Inside was a replica of Maria Santos's knife, exact in every detail down to the wear marks on the handle beneath it. A plaque read, "Sometimes the most sophisticated solution is knowing you don't need one." Human visitors to the museum often smiled at this plaque because they understood what it really meant, but visitors from other species would read it and then spend time studying the knife as if it held some secret that would unlock the human ability to thrive in impossible situations. Clickzare maintained the museum personally and gave tours when his schedule permitted. He would show visitors the various equipment failures and explain what had gone wrong. Then, he would bring them to the knife display and wait for the question that always came. But how did she survive with just this? They would ask, and Clickzar would click his mandibles in what observers had learned to recognize as the Vrex equivalent of a knowing smile. She didn't survive with just the knife. He would explain patiently. She survived with knowledge, adaptability, and the willingness to see tools everywhere she looked. The knife was simply the key that unlocked those resources. Could any of us learn to do the same? They would ask, and Clickzar would gesture toward the training center visible through the museum. Windows where candidates from dozens of species were learning to build fires, construct shelters, and purify water using minimal equipment. You already are. He would say Maria Santos returned to Earth after the ceremony and found herself unexpectedly famous news services-wide interviews. Training academies wanted her to teach. Governments wanted her to consult on survival protocols. She turned down most of the attention with polite firmness, but she did accept one position: teaching a course called Adaptive Survival at the Galactic Cooperation University, her first class. Had 200 students from 40 different species. She began the course by placing a knife on the lecture podium. This is not what you're here to learn about. She told them, you're here to learn how to look at any environment and see not obstacles but opportunities. She continued, not barriers but resources, not problems but puzzles waiting to be solved. The knife helps, she concluded, but the real tool is up here. She tapped her forehead. Everything else is just applying that tool to whatever situation you find yourself in. She said, in the back of the classroom, a young Vrex student clicked their mandibles thoughtfully. They had signed up for this course because their mentor Clickzar had recommended it. Now they were beginning to understand why.